To thank you for your indulgence to allow me to speak on this budget which is before us. And to say, Mr. Speaker, that the budget, as is the usual reason for the budget, sets out the plan of expenditure for the government, for the different ministries, the different programs which the government intends to put in place for the good of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. And one of the main reasons for that is that it is the government's business to put in place those plans and those programs and policies. It is not the business of the opposition. It is the government's business to bring the budget and to put forward its plan of expenditure. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that when the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister spoke on Wednesday, he presented a very clear and full account of where the government has gone over the past financial year and set out a clear path for the government and the people of St. Kitts and Nevis for the next cycle of government expenditure and activity for 2019. And it is surprising to me, or it was surprising to me, that when the leader of the opposition sought to respond to the statement made by the Prime Minister, that he, maybe true to form, proceeded along a path which had the House in an uproar, because it was clear that the leader of the opposition had very little intention of addressing anything substantively in the budget which was presented. Or, if not in what was actually presented, at least he would have received a copy of the budget statement and the estimates, which were the bases of the presentation by the government side on Wednesday. So I listened on Thursday morning, and I heard accusations or allegations of the government being corrupt, engaging in fraud, or the basis for fraud is in the budget. Mr. Speaker, I took umbrance and objection to that kind of approach and statement. And you will recall, Mr. Speaker, that I arose on 2 occasions and voiced my serious concern and objection. And Mr. Speaker, I want to apologize to you and to the House if it seemed then that I went overboard a little bit. But what struck me, Mr. Speaker, was the leader of opposition seemed to have engaged in what in psychology is called mirror imaging. And what do I mean by that? Mirror imaging is when someone seeks to portray someone else as behaving in the way which he would usually behave. So if one wants to engage in mirror imaging, one who has been involved in corrupt practices, one has been involved in nepotism, if one has been involved in engaging and giving handouts to friends and family, and one wants to deflect that, one would then accuse somebody else of doing that thing. That's mirror imaging. And that's what I heard from the leader of the opposition. And it was disturbing because every single person in this country of St. Kitts and Nevis and elsewhere, throughout the world, the region, know of the manner in which the leader of the opposition conducted the government affairs of this country. Mr. Speaker, the minister, the leader of the opposition, spoke about different government agencies, different government statutory corporations. And he had the temerity to speak about the Social Security Board being used as a slush fund by this government. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the people of this country that since the Team Unity government assumed government and the control or the reins of guiding the processes and the policies and programs of this country, we have sought to do things in accordance with the rules and the laws of this country. And Social Security is one of those areas which I have responsibility for, Mr. Speaker. And when I heard the leader of the opposition indicate in this House that we have not placed any accounts for Social Security or placed any actuarial studies of Social Security, it must be either the leader of the opposition does not live in St. Kitts and Nevis, or if he has an address of residence here, that he must reside somewhere else. I'm sure he was here in the House when I laid 3 sets of actuarial studies.
Selective amnesia.
And you know, Mr. Speaker, I have that very word here in my notes. Convenient amnesia.
Selective amnesia.
Because we were worried, Mr. Speaker, and when I discussed with the board and the acting director of Social Security, it was made clear to me that the board felt that we had to get these documents into the House. And I'm talking of accounts for 2011,
which they had not done,
which were presented by the actuary to the government through the board. The accounts for 2014, which were presented and which was sitting, the actuarial review, which was sitting somewhere in the office of the minister then responsible for Social Security. Mr. Speaker, it is that kind of deliberate attempt to mislead the people of the country which I feel creates issues in St. Kitts and Nevis. And it is our business as government to seek to rectify, and that is what we've been doing over the past 3.5 years, seeking to turn around the way people perceive things being done in St. Kitts and Nevis. And Social Security is one such. And I'll give you a couple of examples, Mr. Speaker. But let me just go back. I think, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member clearly, as one of the members here, must have a case of convenient amnesia. He forgets for his own convenience to try and make a point. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that he has to remember, and members opposite, all of them collectively and individually must remember that the people of St. Kitts are an intelligent populace. And while it may make for political games, it does not help the country to move forward, as we have seen over the years. So, Speaker, I go back to looking at matters to do with Social Security and what transpired, some of the things which transpired under the Labour administration, over which the leader of the opposition who spoke here on Thursday presided. Talking about corruption, talking about using resources to assist friends and family. I want to draw and remind the members opposite of something called La Valley.
Yes, talk about that.
Do they know of La Valley, what it is, apart from a name of an area? When millions of dollars were expended, or let me say, rather, millions of dollars left the coffers of government, apparently for the development of an area, and all that was seen at that area was a green fence. For years, nothing. There was supposed to have been a plant, a desalination plant, which had been purchased for the project, which ought to have been constructed. Should have been a resort with golf course and golf house and a whole range of development north of Sandy Point, between Sandy Point and Newton Ground. Maybe the honourable leader of the opposition or anyone on the government side may wish to enlighten the people of this country as to what happened to that project and the money, the funds, the millions of dollars which were poured into that failed project. So, Speaker, that is only one of the black eyes which the leader of the opposition has left in this country, the failed La Valley project. Millions of dollars squandered, no accounting, and this government is seeking to unravel the mystery which surrounds the La Valley, the failed La Valley project. So to come into this house and talk about corruption and fraud, it is only left for us to do whatever we can to find out, as we would say, where the money gone and who might have benefited, who in government might have benefited from facilitating the outflow of funds to that project, which has never, as I say, knocked a nail in the ground. And that is what Team Unity has been seeking to undo. That's one of the things we've been seeking to undo and try to get to grips with. Mr. Speaker, I go on. And I can speak because he spoke about SIDF and how this Team Unity is seeking to handle and clean up all of the morass which surrounds and surrounded the SIDF. So in opposition, we called for the SIDF funds, which were the proceeds of the investment for citizenship in St. Kitts and Nevis, contribution, which we believed should have been placed in the consolidated fund, not into any private foundation.
Where is it now?
Mr. Speaker, I've said I will come.
Okay.
Let me get there. Millions of dollars from the SIDF, as it were, handed over to so-called development projects. And if we look at the way in which these projects like Kitchen Hill, Christoph Harbour, if we look at the way the funds of SIDF were leaked out, drained out of the fund, as if it were the private bank account of those who were supposedly managing it for the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. When we look at the Kitchen Hill, for example, and how that concoction of a project has left the country and the government, because governments go on, and we are left holding this basket. Say for something like the Kitchen Hill project, a project which millions and millions of dollars were put by SIDF into a project without clear guidelines as to what the project should become.
Really?
It is shameful, Mr. Speaker, to say the very least. And it could be that we've taken a little while, maybe a little too long, to come to the point where we put somebody in jail for misappropriation of government funds.
Somebody has been in jail for Iraqi lands. Selling lands, the Iraqi.
That is the charge which we have to try and deal with. Mr. Speaker, that is where we may have been too slow in coming to the conclusion with Kitchen Hill. But let me say something, and I'm sure the Minister of Finance, when it comes to wrap up, will deal with it in more detail. Because in order to save the employment, because the project is bankrupt, and every month the managers are holding out their hands for monies from SIDF to pay their account, operational costs. That can't be right.
And bouncing Bank of Nevis checks.
That can't be right. And those are the substantive things that we need to look at, to the point where the project now, based on the, as I said, the concocted agreements, there are so many liabilities which have to be looked at that we have not even seen. We can't even see the end of this project and how any resolution will take place within a reasonably short time. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that based on little snippets of conversations which we have from time to time, that while we seek to engage in good governance and transparency and to make things better for the people of this country, there will always be those who will, by deliberate misinformation, seek to create diversion. And the Kitchen Hill is one such project. I've spoken of the millions of dollars which were pumped in, and which, according to the concocted agreement, the demands which were ongoing on SIDF being pumped in, and no accountability, Mr. Speaker. That is the question. The accountability for the finance. And that is why this government had to engage an international accounting firm to do an evaluation, an assessment of that project to see if we can trace. And that is why also one of the principals, the lead persons in that arrangement, had to be asked to leave. Because we are satisfied, based on what is happening, that the arrangements were improperly done, and there might very well have been fraud, and there clearly were signs of corrupt practices, not just by the lead person, but members of the foundation. Members of the foundation. And the very project, Kitchen Hill, owed Social Security hundreds of thousands of dollars, which we had to seek to collect. Mr. Speaker, so when you look back over Thursday's presentation by the Leader of the Opposition about corruption and fraud and so on, really one has to wonder if the member has a convenient memory or is simply suffering from amnesia, or, as one judge put it, that he is a stranger to the truth. Mr. Speaker, if you were to become privy to the Christopher Harbour, and while one does not really want to knock these projects, one has to seek to explain to the people what has become of the millions of dollars. And the government is now in serious discussion with the Christopher Harbour people to try and get some resolution and try and get the end, or bring an end to what clearly was a lopsided or an unfortunately not well thought out, either legally or in terms of policy, the Christopher Harbour and its relation to the SIDF fund. And it makes you wonder, Mr. Speaker, what sort of legal advice was given and what sort of business advice was given to the government to get it to, or the SIDF, to put all that money into Christopher Harbour as if it were a bottomless pit, coming back for more, just like the grave, always wanting more and never satisfied. And I don't really mind too much, whether or not the principal officers feel aggrieved about it. Because the people who should be aggrieved, and more so than anybody, is the government of the day and the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. We had talk of the CBI program and how it was being used. And I'm not, Mr. Speaker, going to say a thing about Capis and Bass. Not a thing. Nothing.
You're not going to mention it? No.
Huh?
You're not going to mention it?
No, I'm not going to say a word. Because I have my own thoughts and perhaps my own knowledge. But I will leave that for a subsequent time. Because, why?
I just want to know, I'm not familiar with
I have one owner is member for number 3, I think. But I won't say anything about it. Mr. Speaker, I said I'm not going to say much more about it because I will say this, however, that one thing which is clear and which must be understood, that the owners or principals of Capis and Bass must know what their relationship is through the CBI program and how they have acted and how they have acted in respect of other developments in which they have a relationship in respect of the Citizenship by Investment program. Maybe we'll get an explanation. But I want, Mr. Speaker, I've never been one to let people direct and tell me what to say. I've been told I'm a very hard-headed person. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I will look at another project under the CBI program. And it's a project up the hill which I believe a private citizen of this country, Mr. Allers, has been involved in. And we have to deal with these matters all the time, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say this. I went to have a look at the project which Social Security has to do with Up Beacon Heights. Up Beacon Heights. And the Beacon Heights project, on the way to the Beacon Heights project, I took a wrong turn, Mr. Speaker. Gentlemen, leave the gentleman alone, man. Pressure is a hell of a thing, you know. Pressure is a hell of a thing. And especially if the pressure is not concocted. If it's truth. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, so I went and looked at the project. Because we hear about the CBI project and how the CBI project, there are unfinished projects in this country. So I asked someone in the area what that project was, because I saw some unfinished buildings. And I asked, and they said, this is a project which was approved for the CBI citizenship program and was under the direction, development of Mr. Allers, Ashley Allers, I think. So that project, I saw far from finished, but as we understand it, the persons who have invested in the project and have paid the investment money for the project and have received their citizenship certificate. But there's nothing there for them. It's been transferred, but all we have is concrete walls, nothing. Concrete walls and nothing else. After 5 or 6 years, Mr. Speaker, and for the leader of the opposition to come in here and talk about CBI project and unfinished projects, and I saw it boggles the mind of persons who live in this country. They're the few who would want to agree with what he is saying, because maybe they're all part and parcel of the same group. I don't know. And this is what we have to deal with, Mr. Speaker. And that's only a few under the CBI, SIDF, and the CBI proper. There are others. But I look at Social Security, because there was a statement made about the Social Security Board and who is on the board. Mr. Speaker, the Social Security Board, I made as a minister, talk to persons who knew more about the people here personally. And I talked about the people in Nevis myself, because I knew them, who could make a positive and substantive and substantial contribution to the Social Security Board to manage the funds of the people of this country, which they manage in trust. We initially had a young lady from Sandy Point who is a CPA, an accountant qualified. And she said, listen, when we asked her to do some stuff, from Sandy Point?
No, she's in Bird Rock.
Well, I do apologize, sir. From Bird Rock. But I got to know the lady because I know her parents very well. And when we looked at, discussed some of the transactions which were overhanging from the previous board, decisions which they had made, and trying to get them to go ahead, the chairman said, I will not be able to put my signature on these things because they're not proper. And she resigned. Fine. There were decisions made by the previous board headed by Mr. Halver Hendrickson. And I'm going to see, I think I have the list of the board members somewhere. I'll try and find that, Mr. Speaker, because I want to go through the board, the members of the board then, so that we could have an understanding that when the member opposite talked about persons who are political and so on, and making decisions which are tantamount to making the Social Security funds, or Social Security a slush fund. This is a former board of the Social Security Board. Halver Hendrickson, chair. Stanley Franks, deputy chair. Victor Earl, Frank Farrell, Claudius Delaney, Eslyn Swanston, Dennis Phillip, Carlin Pemberton, Myrna Leiber, the last two are from Nevis, and Sandra Davron, who was secretary. That is the board which dealt with decision to dealing with the Beacon Heights. And with the Beacon Heights, a development to be funded by or under with lands of Social Security. One gentleman, massive project, was given exclusive right to develop or to sell the properties. And up to today, I doubt that they have sold any properties under the aegis of that gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I make that statement because when the Team Unity government came into office, we had to deal with some of the decisions which were made by the Board of Social Security at the time. To the point where, Mr. Speaker, a decision of the investment committee at the time, without the approval of the board, to purchase lands up in the hills, lands which were owned by a known and strong supporter of the government of the day. I was advised, let me not say we, let me put myself in there because I'm the minister and I'm ducking from anything.
Yes.
The lands were being, that the board or the investment committee was told, go ahead and make an offer to purchase the land for $18 million before any valuation was done.
What was that? Before the value?
A fountain,
Fountain?
yes.
Oh.
Before the valuation, the land was done. Agreed to make an offer to pay. I don't understand if you're doing business. You wait for an offer to come to you and you determine whether or not you're going to buy. $18 million of social security, the people's money.
Wow.
And then ask for a valuation after they had agreed to pay $18 million. And the valuation which came, Mr. Speaker, there were 3 valuations, if my memory serves me correct. And the highest of the valuations was $7 million.
Wow. And the average to pay how much?
18.
18. And the valuation
The highest valuation. That means that other persons who did the valuation were below $7 million.
$11 million extra?
Mr. Speaker, this is why I'm saying that I believe that the member who spoke for the government clearly was suffering from convenient memory and trying to say to the people of this country that Social Security is involved as a slush fund. My first dictate to Social Security and the board was any decision made to expend the people's money must be done on a rational basis and must make business sense. Otherwise, no money will be expended. So even when London Housing wanted to get money to build houses, the minister had to present a proper proposal, setting it out to get the $30 million to engage in the construction of houses for the people of this country from Social Security, because we believe that we must not take our trust lightly. And that is my charge to the board. The board comprises Oscar Walters now, he was deputy chair, Victor Earl, we've got Claudia Thompson, we have Mr. Bailey is acting director, we have a representative from the Trades and Labor Union, Frank Farrell, Mr. Damian Hobson, representing the private sector, We have a representative of the Development Bank, Mr. Harris, because there is some symbiotic arrangement between the two institutions. Nothing to do, and I am satisfied in my own mind that here we have someone who could bring his capacity as a financial manager to assist in making decisions. It's not a one-man show. It's not somebody calling and saying, do this and pay that and buy from this person. As in the case of the Franklands property, lands which the Social Security bought, again, for an excessively overpriced amount. And now trying to sell and develop a property, they're finding that because of the location of the land, it is nigh impossible to get any of the land sold. And to come in here and talk about this government is engaging in fraud and corruption, forgetting what transpired and the mess that we have to clean up to get this government and this country back on an even keel. So, Speaker, I don't really want to talk about the Dubai consulate. Why? Because the member who I want to hear it is not here, and I want to see his face when I talk about it.
This is not just
Well, I'll talk about it then.
okay. We want to hear about it. People want to hear about it.
The leader of the opposition sent his, I almost said spouse, but I don't know how to clarify it. The mother of his children, his
Baby mother.
baby mother, as consul to Dubai to handle the business of this country, without reference to the Minister of Finance at the time.
And that in particular fields.
Foreign affairs.
Foreign Affairs. And after the government change, and I was invited by one of the persons who was marketing the citizenship by investment to be a speaker at the conference in Dubai. So I went to transact the engagement on behalf of the government, spoke at the conference. And then after the conference, we had representatives from St. Kitts other than myself. And we decided that we would visit our consulate. We would visit the consulate. We went there and we had the devil's own time to get into the consulate, because it seems the consul didn't understand that she was supposed to be there to represent citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis. It was not her private business. And we almost had to go and get the police, but Dubai is a funny place, so we didn't go that route. We thought we would be patient until we were able to get into the consulate. And the kind of dismissiveness with which I, as a minister and representative of the people of this country, was treated tells me that somewhere a mistake was made, a deliberate mistake, to have someone like that representing the people of St. Kitts and Nevis in an important country for an important process dealing with the business of this country. So, Mr. Speaker, you see what we are talking about. I said the Ministry of Labor, Social Security, and Ecclesiastical Affairs is a small ministry in terms of the amount of money we have allocated. But our influence or our work permeates every single area of life in St. Kitts and Nevis. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, when I heard the Leader of the Opposition speaking and his attempt to make allegations about the Ministry of Social Security, I thought I had to respond and to clear up one or two matters. And there is more, Mr. Speaker, because we'll have many more sittings of the House, But we can't play out everything one time. It's like if you want to make 100, those who play cricket, you can't hit 100 in one shot. You have to dig in sometimes and take a single. You might hit a 4, you might hit 2 6s in a row. But you can't hit 100 in one over. Take time.
Yes. And when to leave some things too.
We have to know when to leave some stuff.
Yes.
And we have to trust that when the stuff which comes, that it comes in the right place.
That's right.
Before you respond, before you touch it.
Yes.
Just in case you offline a little bit and get a little edge and get out. I don't want to get out yet.
No. Take it right in the middle anymore. Yes.
But this is where we are. This government, Mr. Speaker, and so the Ministry of Labor, we have made a significant difference in the way that things are done in terms of the industrial relations and labor relations in this country. Because we have moved away from the old method of confrontation to get things done, or to get workers' rights and workers' compensation and so on done. What we have embarked upon is a studied and deliberate approach to engage in ongoing consultation through tripartite dialogue with representatives of the workers and representatives of the employers and the government. And we are not there as mediators. That's not our function. Our function is to do more than mediate, but to guide the process and to make sure that the mediation, or which will take place when there is confrontation, that we mitigate against that, that we protect that or prevent that from happening, because we engage in the discussions up front on an ongoing basis. And we have established, Mr. Speaker, a tripartite committee which meets regularly to discuss the issues relating to workers and employers in this country from time to time. Because I am a firm believer that we cannot have the kind of distress and disruptions which dissatisfied workers could bring to an economic climate. Those of us who have been following, say, Grenada, for example, and that is perhaps the most recent, where the teachers went on strike and they were joined by public servants. In Guyana, the same thing, causing disruption not just to the economy or the economic activity, but to the social lives and the lives of our young people. We don't want that to happen here. And that is why we have adopted, since 2015, a positive approach of engaging in constructive dialogue with the other social partners to make certain that we keep and maintain a harmonious environment for our country. We have also worked very closely with the ILO, representatives of the ILO. And with their assistance, we have hosted a number of workshops, training our people so that they can have an appreciation of what it means to be an employee. We have also had members from the private sector, the business community, participating, because we are of the view, and I'm of the view, that if there is greater understanding and harmony between the two partners, and the government can direct that we will have a peaceful environment in which businesses can flourish, where investment can take place. It is true, Mr. Speaker, that we have some challenges. We have some challenges where some employers are not paying their social security contribution on behalf of the workers. But we've mandated both the Department of Labor through the Commissioner and the Social Security through its collecting officers to make certain that we deal with that problem, that challenge. And I can look, Mr. Speaker, at a chart which I got from the Social Security. We have 2018, the first quarter of contributions from employers, $24.1 million. The second quarter, 23.5. The third quarter, 22.6. And what that is saying is that some people are not making their contribution. Because in terms of the registration of workers, we have seen an increase in the registration of workers who then are issued with a Social Security identification card. So we do have this problem, Mr. Speaker, which we have to address. We have, in terms of the fourth quarter up to the 12th of October 2018, we have $16.1 million already contributed from the workers, from the employers. And they have advised me that the projected amount is $25.6 million. But even with the laxness or the non-compliance, the projected amount is still more than the 93.04 million of 2017. Now what does that say to us? You have an increase in the projected, but then I went a little further and asked the acting director, what is the amount owing from to Social Security? And it says they're looking about $10 million owing to Social Security for collections. Mr. Speaker, that is where we are directing our energy. One, to ensure that we maintain the ongoing dialogue between the government and the other two partners in the tripartite arrangement. And the objective of that is to ensure that there is harmony. And also, Mr. Speaker, we do not just have our dialogue with them, we have also to deal with individuals who might have their own individual concerns. And whenever we get those individual concerns, we have made it our business to interact directly with those persons so that we can deal with them, whether it is they're not getting their employers to sign off on their severance or whatever other problems they have, may have misunderstandings in the workplace. I have mandated that the most senior staff must visit all of the employment establishments to make certain we have an understanding and guide them as to what is expected of them as employers, but also to guide the employees, the workers, as to what is expected of them. And it is through that process that we are able to reduce the tension and the stress within the marketplace as far as labor relations is concerned. Mr. Speaker, we have within the Ministry of Labor we have done some subdivision or the, what you might call the division of labor, where we have different units dealing with different aspects of the work in the workplace. We have a social protection unit, which deals with matters of severance and long service gratuity and other claims or issues which might arise. We have an employment unit which deals with the compilation and the maintenance of a database of persons who are in the marketplace looking for a job. With their qualifications, we have that, and we try to match them with the jobs which are available from the employment side so that we can get our people employed. But we have an issue, Mr. Speaker, and I want to raise it because one of the issues which we have to deal with in respect of social protection and the employment unit, those two units, is that a number of persons over the years may not have understood fully what is the process for them to receive their severance pay. So we've had to go on a full education drive, discussing with people what the process is to make certain that we get a clear understanding so we don't have ongoing conflicts and misunderstandings which may lead to someone genuinely not applying or not following the process and losing his or her severance if he's entitled. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, even if the employer has not been making the contribution, we do not say to someone because no contribution was made on his or her behalf that you cannot get the severance. We pay the severance where it is applicable, and then we go out and check with the person who has not made the contribution to make certain that that is done in accordance with the law. The employment unit, Mr. Speaker, a lot of people don't want to come to the employment unit. They want to go and face the employers on their own. That's fine. That's a choice they make. Also, on the other hand, the employers may not want to provide the employment unit or the Ministry of Labor with that information. They prefer to do their own recruitment. That is fine. But we are trying to be almost like a one-stop shop for that process and to give good representation for our people on both sides of the partnership in St. Kitts and Nevis. The other area which we look at, Mr. Speaker, and which is important, is the Occupational Safety and Health and Inspectorate Unit. And what that does, it deals with matters, and you heard on Friday, before we adjourned, Minister Vance speak about the conditions of work, the physical conditions of work. But we don't only look at the physical conditions, because we have to look at whether or not there are issues of threats in the workplace, where people are not comfortable because of contention in the workplace. We feel that that is something which we need to be able to get resolutions on. And that applies across the board. And it does not only apply to the small business, it applies to big businesses as well. Because, Mr. Speaker, we need to understand that there are certain human rights, basic human rights, which our people must feel that that should be honored. And it's the right to work if they have the qualifications. Because some people believe that they have an entitlement. A right and entitlement are not necessarily the same things. If you have the qualifications and you make an application to work, one must also understand that there may be 10 or 20 other persons with the same qualifications who might be applying for that very job. But we intend, or we ask, that fairness fairness apply in the way people are employed and in the way people are paid, that they're paid fair wages for fair work. And it goes both ways, Mr. Speaker. So that Occupational Safety and Health and Inspectorate Unit, I have mandated through the Permanent Secretary and the Commissioner that they visit every single place where people work in St. Kitts and Nevis. Knowing also that in Nevis there is a separate department, but I think the rule applies to them as well, because as Minister responsible for labor in Nevis for some years, that was the way we functioned to reduce any tension in the workplace and to deal with issues which arise from time to time. So inspection of business places, inspection of work sites, whether it is a big construction site or a small single operated shop, we have to ensure that these are maintained and operated in accordance with the health rules and the safety rules. Now, I spoke, Mr. Speaker, of the National Tripartite Committee, so I don't need to say much more. But in making a reference to it, I want to take us a step further. Because one of the main areas which we are looking at, and it's very important for us, is that we must have in St. Kitts and Nevis a modern labor code to guide the way we manage our labor environment in St. Kitts and Nevis. We've had over the years, as we try to deal and respond to issues in the labor market and in the workplace, issues which affect workers, whether in the sugar fields or in the factories or wherever people worked in the commercial places. You would get piecemeal legislation. You would get piecemeal amendment, to the point where in St. Kitts and Nevis we have had 23 pieces of legislation which relate to labor matters in St. Kitts and Nevis. In the last 2 years, we have been looking at that. Sometime before, there was a consultant funded by the ILO which presented a draft. But based on my information from the persons, the experts, the draft was really not very well done and did not cover the areas which we thought were necessary to guide the functions of the people of this country, both in terms of employers and workers, to ensure we have an efficient labor market in St. Kitts and Nevis. So for especially in the last 12 months, we have been working through the National Tripartite Committee to get this labor code on the road. We have already received an initial draft, and a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, we received an amended, or the second draft, which was discussed at a conference here, and sadly, Mr. Speaker, I was not here because I was on business in Trinidad on behalf of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. But based on my initial interaction with the first draft with the members of the Tripartite Committee who represented, said, workers and commerce, and we have broadened it to include other associate members to get the best or the broadest view on the document. The first draft was thoroughly discussed and then sent back to the draftsperson to make the modifications and the expansions so that we can have what could be a model, modern labor code for St. Kitts and Nevis. So that activity will certainly engage us in the Ministry of Labor in the next year, and we hope, Mr. Speaker, by the end of the first quarter at the latest, to be able to bring to this Honourable House the draft to lay the draft and also then to begin the discussion after members have had a chance to look at that draft. So, Speaker, the question was raised, and I need not ignore it, although I know it will be dealt with, because it hinges on a matter to do with the citizenship program. And it is a situation which the leader of the opposition talked about the hurricane fund and what happened to the fund. And the fund is being used for corrupt purposes, or could be the basis for fraud. Mr. Speaker, I'm answering it in the context of what I had discussed before in terms of the CBI and the SIDF, and that is the fund, the contributions to that fund are paid into the consolidated fund of this country. Just as we had advised on the SIDF, don't have super and extra funds which relate to the patrimony of the country being handled by private citizens who could be manipulated by persons who appoint them. And that is what happened with the SIDF fund. That is what happened. Where funds were just handed to people to manage without any accountability. One person apparently got $500,000, no project, no accountability. One person got some thousands of dollars to set up a chicken production, an egg production, and they ain't got no chickens. You know, these are the things which boggle the minds of the people of this country. And then to have come in here on Thursday and to be confronted by the diatribe which we heard, and a question about where is the HR fund, where is the Hurricane Relief Fund? The Hurricane Relief Fund was mandated by this government to be paid into the consolidated fund under the control of the Accountant General, as are all other funds, taxes, and so on, which are collected for and on behalf of the people. That's what the Constitution says. Nothing to do with me or the Prime Minister or anybody. That's what the Constitution says. They should be paid into the what? The consolidated fund. And the person who controls the consolidated fund is the Accountant General and the staff. And to have had the question asked, and I think that is when I got up, Mr. Speaker. You may not remember because we've had a longish weekend. And said, but for the member opposite to come into the House and seek to, or pretend that he does not know, or maybe he does not know, that if he wants to know anything about government accounts, as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, he has a duty. And he could therefore have the authority to investigate, to ask questions and get answers about government funds or government expenditure or government revenues. And that is and I heard somebody talking about hypocrisy. I'm not even going to call it hypocrisy. That is the effort to maliciously mislead the people of the country. And it is a severe dereliction of duty on behalf of the leader of the opposition as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. A serious dereliction of duty. And for those of us who may not know, The leader of the opposition has been angling for years to become chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. Years he wants to be chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. Now he is chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. He's not doing anything. And they come into the house asking, where are the funds? Where are the funds? All he has to do is to speak, send it to the channels and ask, listen, I am interested in the Hurricane Relief Fund. I would like to be given an account.
The act doesn't allow for that. So yeah, does not.
Any funds which go into the public accounts, into the government funds, could be challenged, could be asked and inquired into.
Absolutely. The act was very specific. Want to know the act was specific. And I will show that. It's just an excuse not to do anything.
I really don't like to have discussions with persons who are just arguing for the sake of arguing.
Well, you didn't do anything. You had all
Don't worry about me. You're in the chair now. Don't worry about me.
Whatever funds,
Knocks to the house of body. Knocks to the house.
you know, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about Act doesn't allow for that. But if the member, as a member of this House, has a concern about any fund or any expenditure which he thinks might have been misappropriated or correctly appropriated, he could ask a question, he could write, just as he get up and write the Canadian government about the pay.
So once they told me on Wednesday that we don't get extra time, paying an extra time. So they're taking away
Right? He could ask the same way he wrote to SRSS, said don't send them here to help us deal with the crime situation, which is a legacy of the leader of the opposition and his government. And that's not true. Boy, don't let me open my mouth.
Since when is that true?
I want to know.
The gentleman was here when the allegation was made, he never refuted it.
RSS is not brought here for the reason to go in here. That's what they're trying to say. It's the legacy. Be truthful, Mr. Amory.
Mr. Speaker, well, forget about whether it's the purpose or not the purpose. I am saying the same way the leader of the opposition could have found it in his mind or wherever he found it or by whomever advised him to write to the prime ministers and call them and try to get them to do what he felt they should do or not do. Why doesn't it apply the same thing with the government funds?
Does not allow you to do so. And the intention like that.
I'll get a copy of the Constitution for you, right?
It's not in the Constitution, it's in the public accounts committee. They have business. They have business right to call a meeting.
Mr. Speaker?
He doesn't allow you to call a meeting of the past.
Mr. Speaker? The Public Accounts Committee has the right to question any activity which relates to government accounts. It doesn't have to. Mr. Speaker, I don't like to waste time responding to questions which are just calculated to create argument. We're not here for that. We are here to provide guidance and leadership for the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, that the Ministry of Labour has adopted a very positive approach to the functions with which we are charged under the budget. I have laid out for you the activities in which we are dealing. I spoke of the tripartite committee. I spoke of the work of the Department of Labour. I spoke of the visits. I spoke of the interventions. I spoke of the Labour Code. And those are the matters which will continue to make a difference in the way there is the relationship within the workplace of St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Speaker, I don't know that there's much more that I could add. I've covered, I think, the issue of Social Security having to now follow the rules or the laws which govern its operation. And I can state, Mr. Speaker, that that is the way that our Social Security Board will function as we have dictated over the last few years. I spoke about the housing, which the Minister of Housing had to put forward his case and justify. Not just somebody call and say, give $30 million or $20 million to this or send it to land and housing. Not that. We don't operate like that. When Nevis wanted to borrow $10 million, they had to send a case and justify what are they going to do with it, how many houses they're going to build. They had to send that. Because these funds and Social Security, as I said earlier, are the people's funds held in trust. And it is the nature of trustees that they must act in accordance with the provisions of the legislation which governs their appointment and how they should act. I don't call the chairman and tell him to do that or do whatever. He has to, I have to send him a note, and he has to take it to his board, and they must discuss it, and they must agree and make a decision, as I said, based on rational and objective reasoning before a decision is made. There's another matter which, Mr. Speaker, I just want to finally touch on, and that is the matter of reform of Social Security. I'll raise it because there are some issues, matter of reform of Social Security, whether or not we should have an increase in the age at which people become pensionable. And we are still debating that. Because, Mr. Speaker, I've said in public fora before that it is going to be difficult to increase the age of retirement from 62 to 65. And that to coexist with unemployment of young people. The two things clearly have to be balanced out. And so it is, we are not just listening to people in an unconnected way, but whatever decision we make will have to have the best interests of the people. So if we want to take the retirement age to 65, we have to balance out what will happen to those persons who are coming into the marketplace and looking for employment year after year. How do we juxtapose the two things? And these are things that we are discussing in the tripartite committee and will continue to discuss because they're important to how we look at the labor market, look at Social Security, and look at governance generally in St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Speaker, I will end in a little while, but permit me, as it's just 1 week and a day before Christmas, and although we might have a meeting, we have a meeting due on Wednesday. But while I'm here, because there's no telling that whether I will speak on Wednesday or not, I would like to extend to all the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, and especially to my own constituencies and to my colleagues in this House, all the best for a very blessed, happy Christmas and Carnival. And I had a question the other day whether we should separate Christmas from Carnival. I made no response because people are entitled to their views. But I think we're not the only country which has Christmas and Carnival subsisting. It is for people to make their own determination as to how they will conduct themselves. I don't think we can dictate that. But please, colleagues, members of the House, on both sides, citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis, I extend to all of you my sincere best wishes for a very happy and blessed Christmas. And we look forward to 2019, in which the government will unfold and put into place its plans and programs which were put into the budget for the good of the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, I support the budget and wish it safe passage. Thank you very much.